Hello everyone on YouTube, this is Final Lugia Guardian, and today we're going to be discussing the Callaway X Series 3-wood. This is an older 3-wood that was made at around the same time as the Callaway Big Bertha Fusion FT3 driver. What we're going to do is discuss the specifications of this club, we're going to discuss the performance of this club, and we're going to ultimately then discuss my final thoughts on this club and any thoughts I have on a later club, like a later version of this club. So, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the top of this club, and we're going to work our way down. This Callaway X Series 3-wood has a standard Callaway rubber grip on it. It has some nice indentations in the grip, and it actually has some lines on it on the front to indicate where you should put your thumb. This gives a more consistent grip, which hopefully gives a more consistent strike of the ball, resulting in your ball going straighter and with less deviation. The only issues I have with this grip is that, well, if you're not gripping it exactly right, you can get blisters, but once again, that kind of holds true for every grip, so even though it's a minor critique, I'd say it's one not really worth making. I just mention it for full disclosure. And besides, I wear 2 gloves with my strokes, so I've never had a problem with getting blisters with this particular grip. And maybe you wear 2 gloves as well, or maybe you don't. Maybe you just don't get blisters because your hands have calloused up enough to where you don't have to worry about it. But my thoughts are what they're worth. Moving down to the shaft of the club. The shaft of this club is a Pro Launch Blue. It is, of course, the same as the FT3 driver. It's a Pro Launch Blue shaft with launch monitor tuned technology by Graphaloy. Now, once again, what do we think about launch monitor tuned technology? Well, we think it's essentially the same as Sega's blast processing with their Sega Genesis. Not that this shaft is bad, as just like with the Callaway Big Bertha FT3 driver that has the same kind of shaft, this shaft has performed really well. There's not so much flex. It's not like as stiff as some shafts that I've seen, but it's fairly stiff and it gives a fairly consistent strike of the ball each time. I like it, in my personal taste, but I've used this particular 3-wood for quite a bit of time, so I guess maybe I've just gotten used to it. So, my thoughts for what they're worth on that. Moving down to the head of the club, you'll notice that where the shaft connects with the head, it is not readily adjustable. So, unfortunately, unlike with some of the newer clubs, you cannot adjust this club towards draw or fade bias. It's just stuck with the way it came from the factory. Which is fine for me. I've generally had no problems with this club. It is a 15-degree club face, so that's going to give you a decent amount of loft with your ball. And as far as a fairway wood is concerned, I think that that's plenty, at least for me. But, once again, I've used this club for quite a bit and I've gotten used to it, so maybe if I'd learned on another type of club, I would have gotten used to that. So, take that for what you will. And this club, of course, is composed of a fusion of carbon fiber and metal. That is, it has a metal club face and bottom, and it has a carbon fiber top, and this is supposed to help keep the weight down a bit. However, what you'll notice that, unlike the Callaway Big Bertha Fusion FT3 driver, this particular 3-wood is kind of small. It's not the smallest 3-wood that I've ever seen, but just note that today there are bigger 3-woods out there with a bigger club face, which will give you a better chance at hitting the ball more consistently, even if you were to, say, hit it towards the toe of the club. With this particular club, you kind of have to hit it really close to the center in order to make sure your shot goes where you want it to go. But in general, if you practice, your shots will go where you want them to go. And if you don't like this 3-wood, well, you could get yourself, what is it called, the 1.5 hybrid, the Big Bertha Mini 1.5 hybrid? Or, no, it's not a hybrid. Hybrids are a combination between woods and irons. It's sort of like a miniature driver, and you could use it to replace a 3-wood. Just throwing that out there. And that pretty much will address all the specifications of this club. So, allow me to start with giving you some of the performance now. So, here's the performance. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the performance of this club. So, I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put up the numbers I got that were recorded when I was hitting this thing off the tee. So, here you are. As you can see, a little over 200. is what you can expect out of this club if you're hitting it right, at least if you're hitting it with the speed that I'm able to hit the ball at. And of course, here is the numbers that I got hitting it off the deck. And as you can see, they are a little bit less than what it was off the tee, and that may just be statistical variations in my swing, as I am only human. I'm not that Iron Ivan golf club swinging machine that's meant to test the consistency of clubs, so make of that what you will. But I think in general you can expect, if you're hitting the ball right and getting your technique right, and you're hitting the ball on the face of the club where you're supposed to hit it, then you can expect 200 yards and you can expect it to go fairly straight. This club is fairly consistent as long as you're consistent. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to discuss my final thoughts on this club and discuss my thoughts as it compares with newer clubs. So let's get started on that now. Okay, so now let's give my final thoughts on this club. As I mentioned before, this is an older club. It's around the same age as the Callaway Big Bertha Fusion FT3. However, old doesn't mean bad. Even though it's a smaller club head than what you would have on some other 3-woods, or even the Big Bertha Mini 1.5, which is something I've also had the privilege of trying out, as long as you are able to hit this club close to the center, your ball is going to go fairly straight. You just got to get your technique right, and it'll do its duty as long as you do yours. So that's something you have to keep in mind with this club. It's not as forgiving as some newer clubs are, like the newer Callaway Big Bertha Fusion fairway woods. Those are going to be a bit more forgiving than this particular Callaway X Series 3-wood. However, even though I haven't had a chance to test a Callaway Big Bertha Fusion 3-wood or 5-wood, or any woods that are newer, I have had a chance to test a Callaway Big Bertha Fusion driver, and when compared with my Callaway Big Bertha Fusion FT3, the older driver mind you, keep in mind, with that newer driver I was getting on average about 15 yards less, and about the same as far as accuracy goes. That is the deviation from the center line. Now, of course, that is pretty much the point I want to make. Just because the club is newer does not necessarily mean it's going to perform better in your hands. You may, for whatever reason, get better performance out of an older club. You just have to try the club out, see how it feels in your hands, and then you'll know for certain of whether or not that club is going to fit you well and perform well with you. So just know that before you buy a club. Try it and then buy it. As for me, I kind of like this 3-wood. Even though it's old, even though it's not the most technologically advanced club, I think it's still pretty good, and maybe I'm just biased because it's the club that I use, but make of that what you will. And that will pretty much complete my final thoughts on this club and the thoughts I have on newer versions of this club. So, with that, thank you all for watching, and until next time, take care and happy golfing. Peace.